Translate this, now.
Sir, I'm in the middle of...
Shut up and pick it up. I didn't ask for your schedule. I asked if you can read.
Silence. 26 guests. Not one voice.
You know what? Forget it. Asking you to read is like asking a dog to do math.
Grant Whitmore slapped the 52-page contract on the table. His translator was stuck on the interstate, so he picked the next best joke in the room, his maid.
The black woman in the pressed uniform who hadn't spoken a full sentence in 8 months.
You scrub toilets. That is the ceiling of your existence. So go ahead. Prove me right.
Tessa Collins set her tray down, stopped at the French section.
This one first?
Grant grinned.
Knock yourself out, sweetheart.
He had no idea that this single dare was about to become the most expensive mistake of his life. Whoa. But hold on. To understand what just happened, we gotta go back. 8 months back. Tessa Collins stood outside the iron gates of Whitmore Estate with a single suitcase and a resume she had written in 30 minutes. The resume was a lie. Not the name, not the work ethic, but everything in between. Previous experience: housekeeper for a family in Vermont, 3 years. Reference available upon request. There was no family in Vermont. The head housekeeper, a stiff woman named Mrs. Caldwell, looked Tessa up and down twice before asking her first question. Her eyes lingered on Tessa's hands, rough palms, but fingers too slender for someone who claimed a decade of manual labor. Can you iron dress shirts without leaving creases? Yes, ma'am. Can you serve a 12-course dinner without speaking unless spoken to? Yes, ma'am. Have you ever broken anything valuable? Tessa paused. Not anything I could replace. Mrs. Caldwell stared at her for a long moment. Something flickered behind her eyes. Curiosity, maybe suspicion, but she let it go. She handed Tessa a uniform. Black dress, white apron, flat shoes. Room 14, basement level. Don't be late, don't be loud, don't be noticed. Tessa took the uniform and said nothing else. Her room was 8 feet by 10. A single bed with a thin mattress. A metal shelf bolted to the wall. One window half underground where she could see the shoes of people walking past on the gravel path above. Dress shoes. Heels. Never boots. Never anything that looked like work. She unpacked the suitcase in 4 minutes. 2 sets of clothes, a toothbrush, a photograph of a man with kind eyes and a lopsided smile, which she placed face up on the shelf beside her pillow. Nathan. She didn't talk about Nathan. Not to anyone. Not even to herself. At night, after the house went quiet and the hallway lights dimmed to amber, Tessa read. She kept her books under the mattress, spines facing inward so no one could see the titles. One was in French, another in German, a third in Arabic, its pages soft from years of turning. She read without moving her lips, without making a sound. The way someone reads when they've learned that knowledge is something other people will use against you. Once, around month 3, her phone rang at 11 at night. She answered in a whisper. But the whisper wasn't in English. It was fast, fluid, and precise. The kind of language that doesn't come from apps or textbooks. It comes from years, from living inside the words, from dreaming in them. She hung up after 90 seconds, pressed the phone against her chest, stared at the ceiling until her breathing slowed. The next morning, she was back on her knees, scrubbing the marble floor of the east hallway, her face as blank as the stone beneath her hands. Eleanor Price, Grant's executive assistant, passed her every morning at 7:15. Most days, she didn't look down. But one Thursday she did, and noticed the book tucked under Tessa's arm. A French edition of a legal textbook, not a novel, not a tourist phrase book, a textbook on international contract law. Eleanor said nothing, but she slowed her step, and from that Thursday on, she started watching the quiet black woman with the careful hands and the dark eyes that tracked every foreign conversation in the room like a hawk following prey through open sky. Grant Whitmore built his empire the way some men build walls, fast, tall, and with no regard for what got buried underneath. 52 years old, self-made, real estate, started with a single duplex in Newark at 23 and turned it into a portfolio worth $600 million by the time he was 45. The business magazines loved him. Forbes profiled him twice. A local news channel called him New Jersey's most ambitious self-starter. The employees did not share that enthusiasm. He ran the estate the way he ran his boardroom. Every person had a function. Every function had a number. The gardener was grounds 1. The chef was kitchen 1. Tessa was housekeeping 3. He never used their names. Names implied familiarity. Familiarity implied equality. And Grant Whitmore did not believe in equality. He believed in leverage. He believed that every relationship in his life had a top and a bottom, and he had spent 52 years making sure he was never on the wrong end. The estate itself reflected this. 12 bedrooms, a wine cellar that held 3,000 bottles, a circular driveway lined with imported Italian stone, and a staff of 9 who moved through the house like ghosts, seen only when needed, heard never. Tuesdays were the worst. That was when Grant held his working dinners. 8 to 12 guests, always investors, always someone he needed to impress or intimidate. The staff moved through those nights like soldiers through a minefield. One wrong plate, one slow pour, one wrinkle on a tablecloth. Any of it could trigger an explosion that would echo through the house for days. The chef, a quiet man named Douglas, once served a steak medium instead of medium rare. Grant didn't yell. He did something worse. He picked up the plate, walked it to the kitchen, and set it on the counter in front of Douglas while 3 guests watched from the doorway. "If I wanted rubber," Grant said, "I'd chew my shoe." Douglas stood there, towel in hand, and said nothing. He couldn't. He had 2 kids in braces and a mortgage that didn't care about dignity. That was Grant's real talent. Not real estate, not negotiation. He knew exactly how much silence a person could swallow before they broke, and he always stopped one sentence short. Tessa learned this on her second week. Grant had guests from London. She was clearing plates when one of them asked her a question in passing, something simple about the wine. Before she could answer, Grant cut in. "She doesn't talk. She cleans. That's the arrangement." The guest laughed, politely. Tessa kept moving, but her fingers tightened around the plate so hard her knuckles went pale. From then on, she made herself smaller, quieter. She entered rooms the way weather changes, slowly enough that no one notices until it's already different. But Eleanor Price noticed.
Eleanor had worked for Grant for 11 years. Executive assistant, gatekeeper. The only person in the building who could push back on him without consequences, mostly because she knew where every skeleton was buried, and Grant knew she knew. She was sharp, organized, and deeply tired of watching Grant treat human beings like rented furniture. She noticed Tessa early. Not because Tessa was loud or clumsy or different, but because she was too perfect, too still, too careful. The kind of careful that doesn't come from training. It comes from hiding. Eleanor kept a mental file. The French book, the phone call at midnight, the way Tessa's eyes moved when a foreign guest spoke. Not confused, not curious. Tracking, processing, understanding. She didn't say anything. Not yet, but she started keeping Tessa's employee file in a separate drawer. The first time it happened in front of guests, Tessa told herself it was an accident, a bad mood, a bad day, a man under pressure who took it out on the nearest target. Everyone has those days. She'd had them herself. The second time, she stopped making excuses. The third time, she stopped feeling anything at all. That was the dangerous part. Not the humiliation itself, but how quickly she learned to absorb it.
It was a Thursday in October. The leaves outside had turned amber and gold, the kind of beauty that makes rich people throw parties. Grant was hosting a group of bankers from Philadelphia, 6 men in charcoal suits, drinking 20-year scotch in the west drawing room while Tessa polished the floor on her hands and knees. Grant walked in with the group. He stopped 3 feet from her. She kept polishing. "See this?" He pointed down at her like she was part of the flooring. "Missed a spot. Right there." Tessa looked. The marble was spotless. "I don't see." "I didn't ask what you see. I said you missed a spot. Do it again." She did it again. The bankers watched. One of them shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the closest thing to discomfort anyone in Grant Whitmore's house ever showed. When she finished, Grant tilted his head. Again. She did it a third time. He didn't say thank you. He didn't even nod. He just turned back to his guests and said, "That's the problem with hiring cheap. You have to check everything twice." The bankers laughed. Tessa's knees ached against the cold stone. She kept her face flat. She had practiced that face in the mirror, the one that showed nothing, cost nothing, gave nothing away. The second incident was worse because it was public. Grant was introducing his household staff to a visiting couple from Boston. He walked down the line. Douglas, the chef, Mrs. Caldwell, the 2 gardeners, the driver. One by one, he gave their names. Brief, efficient. When he reached Tessa, he didn't stop. He walked right past her. The Boston woman glanced at Tessa and opened her mouth to ask. Grant answered before the question landed. "She doesn't count." 3 words. Tessa heard them from 2 feet away. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, but something behind her eyes shifted, the way a door locks from the inside without making a sound. The third incident was the one that almost broke her. A Saturday night dinner, 12 guests. Tessa was pouring water when her elbow caught the edge of a glass. It tipped. Water spread across the tablecloth in a slow, creeping circle. Grant stood up. "Apologize." "I'm sorry, sir." "Not to me. To every person at this table, one by one, starting with Mr. Henderson." 12 apologies. Tessa walked around the table, stopping at each chair, bowing her head slightly, saying the same 2 words 12 times, while Grant watched with his arms folded and a smile that never reached his eyes. That night, in her basement room, she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at Nathan's photograph. His smile hadn't changed. It never would. But hers had. She couldn't remember the last time she'd used it for something real. The medical bills were still $40,000 deep. The funeral home had sent a second notice. The credit card company had started calling twice a day. She had done the math 100 times, and the math never changed. She could quit tomorrow and be homeless by Friday. Or she could stay and keep swallowing. She stayed. She always stayed. She opened her journal, a small black notebook she kept in the bedside drawer. She wrote 3 pages that night. Fast, fluid. The pen barely lifted from the paper. Every word was in French. She closed the notebook, slid it back into the drawer, turned off the lamp.
In the darkness, for just a moment, her lips moved. A sentence in Japanese. Quiet. Almost silent. The kind of thing a person says when they're reminding themselves they still exist. Then nothing. Just the sound of the house settling above her, and the distant clink of Grant Whitmore pouring himself one last drink.
Nah. Are you serious right now? Imagine that's you, on your knees, saying sorry to 12 strangers for water, while your boss just stands there, smiling. $40,000 in debt, and you can't even walk out. What would you do? The invitation cards went out 6 weeks before the dinner, cream-colored, gold-embossed, hand-delivered by courier to 3 countries.
Henri Dubois. The Dubois Group. Paris. Commercial real estate across Western Europe. Quiet money. Old money. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. Mr. Kenji Tanaka. Tanaka Holdings. Tokyo. Infrastructure and development. Disciplined. Precise. Known for walking out of deals mid-sentence if he sensed disrespect. Clara Werner. Werner Capital. Berlin. Legal and financial advisory for cross-border mergers. Sharp. Cold. The type who read contracts the way surgeons read x-rays, looking for what was wrong, not what was right. 3 investors, 3 languages, 1 contract worth $85 million. Grant had spent 4 months preparing. The contract was drafted in 4 languages: English, French, Japanese, and German, each version tailored to the legal standards of its respective country. 52 pages of fine print, liability clauses, equity splits, and exit terms. Every comma argued over. Every footnote lawyered twice. He had hired the best translator in the tri-state area, Philip Ashworth, 61 years old, certified in 9 languages, used by 3 Fortune 500 companies. Philip was supposed to arrive at 4. Dinner started at 7. At 3:45, Grant's phone buzzed. Philip had been rear-ended on the Garden State Parkway. 4-car pileup. Conscious but shaken, his car pinned between a delivery truck and a guardrail. He wasn't coming.
Grant made 7 calls in 12 minutes. 3 translation firms. Voicemail. Booked. Voicemail. 2 freelance interpreters. 1 in Boston, 1 on vacation in Lisbon. A contact at the UN language department who picked up on the 4th ring and said, "Grant, it's Friday evening. I can get you someone by Monday." Monday was 3 days too late. The investors didn't fly across oceans to wait for Monday. They came to sign tonight or walk away forever. That was the deal Grant had pushed for. Urgency was his favorite negotiation tool. Now it was pointed at his own throat. By 5 o'clock, the catering team was setting the table. White linen, crystal glasses, 14 place settings, wine decanted, lobster bisque simmering, flower arrangements that smelled like a funeral, which felt oddly appropriate. Everything was perfect, except the one thing that mattered. Grant stood in his office, tie loose, staring at the contract like it had personally insulted him. Eleanor Price knocked once and stepped in. "The Dubois team landed at Teterboro. Tanaka's car is 20 minutes out. Werner is at the hotel asking about the agenda." Grant didn't look up. "I know." "You need a translator." "I know that too." Eleanor paused. She knew when to push and when to wait. This was a push moment. Maybe someone in the house could help. Someone who? Douglas? The man burns steak. Mrs. Caldwell? She can barely manage English on a good day. "I wasn't thinking of them." Grant looked up. Eleanor held his gaze for 2 seconds, then looked away. It was enough. But Grant wasn't listening. He never listened when the answer was beneath him. "Forget it. I'll handle it myself." But he couldn't. He didn't speak French, didn't speak Japanese, didn't speak German. and the investors expected to review every clause in their native language before signing. That was the agreement. By 6:30, the first car pulled into the driveway. Henri Dubois stepped out in a navy suit, briefcase under his arm, wearing the calm expression of a man who expected precision. 10 minutes later, a black sedan delivered Mr. Tanaka. He adjusted his glasses, studied the estate, and said nothing. Grant straightened his tie, fixed his cufflinks, walked downstairs with a smile hiding the fact that his stomach was turning inside out.
And somewhere in the basement, Tessa Collins closed her book, put on her apron, and headed up to serve dinner. She had no idea what was coming. Neither did he. The dining room was a theater, and Grant Whitmore was the only actor who knew it. 26 guests filled the long mahogany table. Crystal clinked against crystal. Candlelight made everyone look richer than they were. The air smelled of seared lamb, rosemary, and the kind of cologne that costs more than Tessa's monthly salary.
Grant sat at the head, Henri Dubois to his right, Mr. Tanaka to his left. Clara Werner 4 seats down, her reading glasses already perched on her nose, a pin resting beside her plate like a loaded weapon. The first 2 courses went smoothly. Tessa moved between chairs, pouring wine, clearing plates, existing in the margins the way she'd trained herself to. Nobody looked at her. Nobody spoke to her. That was the arrangement. But between the second and third course, the cracks began to show. Clara Werner leaned toward Grant and asked a question in German. Specific. Technical. Something about a liability threshold in Section 9 of the contract. Grant blinked. He smiled the way men smile when they don't understand something but refuse to admit it. "We'll get to that," he said. "After dessert." Clara didn't smile back. Henri Dubois opened his copy of the contract, the French version, and pointed to a paragraph on page 4. He spoke in rapid French, directing his question at Grant. The words tumbled out smooth and precise. Grant nodded as if he understood. He didn't. Not a syllable. Mr. Tanaka said nothing, but he turned to the Japanese section and began reading silently, his finger tracing each line with the patience of a man who finds errors for a living. The room was slipping. Grant could feel it. The deal was a living thing, and it was beginning to breathe on its own, in languages he couldn't follow, in directions he couldn't steer. His third whiskey was already half gone. That's when he saw Tessa. She was standing near the sideboard, a tray of chocolate soufflé balanced on her palm. Quiet, still, invisible, the way she always was. But her eyes were moving, following Dubois' French, tracking Werner's German, shifting to Tanaka's Japanese text. Not confused, not curious, understanding. Something in Grant's chest twisted. Not realization. He wasn't capable of that in the moment. It was something uglier. The desperate reflex of a man losing control who reaches for the nearest person below him to feel powerful again. He put down his glass. "You, quiet one. Come here." Tessa's fingers tightened around the tray. She didn't move. "I said, come here." She walked forward, 3 steps, stopped at the edge of the table. 26 faces turned toward the black woman in the pressed uniform who hadn't spoken a full sentence in 8 months of employment. Grant picked up the contract, all 52 pages, and held it toward her the way someone offers a stick to a dog. "My maid here thinks she's clever." He looked around the table, feeding off the attention like oxygen. Reads books in her little basement room, fancies herself educated. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter. Henri Dubois set his fork down slowly. Clara Werner removed her glasses and folded them shut. "So let's have some fun." Grant fanned the pages open. "Translate this. 1 page. Any language. Get it right. I'll give you a full month's salary. Get it wrong." He paused, savoring the moment. You serve the rest of the night barefoot, like the help you are. More laughter, thinner this time, weaker. A woman at the far end of the table looked at her plate and didn't look up again. Grant leaned closer to Tessa, close enough that she could smell the whiskey and the arrogance on his breath.
Go on. Pick it up. Or are you too stupid to hold a contract the right way up? Silence. Heavy. The kind that presses down on a room like a hand on a chest. Tessa set the tray down. The soufflés wobbled, but held. She wiped her hands on her apron. Slowly. Deliberately. Not nervous. Not shaking. The way someone prepares when they've been carrying something for a very long time and finally have permission to set it down.
She picked up the contract, held it with both hands, flipped past the English section, past the table of contents, opened it to the French text on page 4, the exact paragraph Henri Dubois had been pointing to minutes earlier. She looked at Grant. This one first? Grant grinned. Knock yourself out, sweetheart. He expected stammering, blushing, the quiet satisfaction of watching someone crumble in front of people who would never remember her name. He got none of those things. Tessa Collins took one breath, straightened her spine, and began to read. The first word came out in perfect Parisian French. Crisp. Confident. The accent of someone who hadn't learned the language, but had lived inside it. And the smile on Grant Whitmore's face began to die. The French came out of Tessa Collins like water from a broken dam. Not halting, not rehearsed, not the French of someone who had memorized verb tables in a community college classroom. This was the French of sidewalk cafes and Senate chambers. The French of someone who had argued, laughed, negotiated, and dreamed in the language for years until it became part of her pulse. She read the first paragraph of the contract aloud, a clause outlining the terms of shared liability between Whitmore Holdings and the Dubois Group. Her pronunciation cut through the silence like a bell. She didn't pause. She didn't search for words. She translated each legal term with the ease of someone reading a grocery list. Henri Dubois sat forward in his chair. His hand, which had been resting on his wine glass, went completely still. He followed along with his own French copy, line by line, his eyes narrowing, not with suspicion, but with the slow, quiet recognition of someone hearing their mother tongue spoken perfectly by a person they had been told could barely read. When Tessa finished the first page, she lowered the contract and waited. The room was silent. The kind of silence that has weight. Henri Dubois nodded once. Slowly. A nod that didn't need translation in any language. Grant's smile flickered like a bulb about to blow. Lucky guess, he said. His voice came out thinner than he planned. French is easy. Half the words are the same as English. Try the Japanese section. Page 22. He said it like a dare, but it sounded like a prayer. Someone at the table shifted. A glass was set down too hard. A woman near the window covered her mouth with her napkin. Tessa didn't respond to Grant. She turned the pages, calmly, methodically, past the English appendix, past the financial projections, and landed on the Japanese section. Page 22. A dense block of vertical text covering intellectual property rights and technology transfer obligations. The kind of language that trips up native speakers, let alone a woman who supposedly spent her days scrubbing marble floors. She began reading. The Japanese that came from her mouth was not textbook Japanese. It was keigo, formal, honorific, the language of boardrooms and diplomatic summits. Each syllable was placed with the precision of a calligrapher's brush. The rhythm was exact. The tone was respectful without being submissive. She read the way interpreters read at the United Nations, clear, measured, authoritative. Mr. Tanaka, who had not spoken a single word during the entire dinner, stood up. Not quickly, not dramatically. He rose from his chair the way a man rises in a temple, with intention and reverence. He looked at Tessa, not at Grant, not at the other guests, only at her. Then he bowed, a slight forward tilt of the head and shoulders, barely 3 inches. But in Japanese culture, from a man of his position to a stranger in a room full of witnesses, it was the equivalent of a standing ovation.
A murmur rippled through the table. Whispers jumped from guest to guest. 3 phones were already recording. A 4th joined. Someone near the back quietly texted a friend. "You won't believe what I'm watching right now." Grant's jaw tightened. The color in his cheeks drained from flush to chalk. He gripped the arm of his chair with both hands. The knuckles went white.
"Anyone can memorize phrases," he said. Louder now, harder. The playfulness was gone. What replaced it was something raw and exposed. The sound of a man who had built a trap and was beginning to understand he had locked himself inside it. The German section, page 28, technical legal language, real terms. Let's see how far this little performance goes. Tessa looked at him. No anger, no triumph, no smirk. Just the steady gaze of a woman standing exactly where she was supposed to be.
She turned to page 28. Clara Werner uncrossed her arms, picked up her own copy, placed her reading glasses back on her nose, and straightened in her chair like a professor about to grade a final exam. The entire room leaned in, and Tessa began to read in German. The German started low, almost gentle, like the opening notes of something dangerous. Tessa read Clause 14, Section 1, Indemnification Thresholds and Cross-Border Dispute Resolution. The words were dense, technical, the kind of German that law students in Munich spend 3 semesters learning to parse. She read them the way a pianist plays scales, without hesitation, without strain, each word landing exactly where it belonged. Clara Werner followed along with her own copy. Her pen was in her hand. She wasn't taking notes. She was checking, word by word, line by line, the way an auditor checks a ledger when something doesn't add up. Halfway through the page, Clara looked up, not at Tessa's paper, at Tessa's face. She studied her for a long moment, the kind of look that passes between professionals who recognize each other across a crowded room. Then she did something no one expected. She set her pen down and began to clap. Slowly, deliberately. 3 measured claps that cut through the silence like gunshots in a cathedral. No one else moved. Not yet. The sound hung in the air, sharp and alone. Henri Dubois picked it up. Then a woman near the middle of the table. Then 2 more guests. Within seconds, half the room was applauding. Not polite cocktail party applause, but the stunned, involuntary kind that comes from witnessing something that rewrites what you thought was possible. Grant Whitmore did not clap. He sat frozen. His whiskey glass tilted in his hand, amber threatening to spill. His mouth was slightly open. Not in awe, in malfunction. Like a machine that had received an input it wasn't built to process. Tessa didn't stop. She turned the page. Then another. She wasn't performing anymore. She was working. Her eyes moved through the German text with the speed of someone who had done this 1,000 times in rooms far more important than this one. And then she stopped. The shift was subtle. A slight tilt of the head, a narrowing of the eyes, the kind of micro-expression that most people would miss, but Clara Werner didn't miss it. She had seen that look before, on the faces of lawyers who had just found the loose thread that would unravel an entire case. Page 31, Section 14, Clause 14.3b. Her brow creased. She read the passage once, twice, a third time, her lips moving silently, the way a doctor rereads a scan when the results don't look right. She placed her finger under a specific line and held it there,
as if pinning something dangerous to the page. She looked up. The applause had faded. The room was watching her face, and her face had changed. Mr. Whitmore.
Grant stared at her. The silence changed shape. Not stunned anymore. Nervous. The kind that comes right before very bad news. Are you aware of Clause 14.3b? Grant said nothing. His throat moved, but no words came out. Tessa held up the contract and pointed to a paragraph buried deep in the German text. 12 lines of subordinate clauses nested inside each other like Russian dolls, designed to hide something lethal. This clause grants the investing parties the unilateral right to withdraw all committed capital within 6 months of execution, without penalty, without compensation, and without prior written notice. She paused. Let the words settle like smoke. In plain English, Mr. Whitmore, if you sign this tonight, any one of these 3 investors can pull their entire stake in 6 months and leave you holding $85 million in obligations with 0 backing. You would be liable for everything. They would owe you nothing. The room didn't gasp. It went completely, surgically still. The kind of still that happens when 26 people hold their breath at the same time. Henri Dubois looked at Clara Werner. Clara looked at Mr. Tanaka. Tanaka closed his copy and placed both hands flat on the table. Grant's face had lost all color. Not pale. Gray. The gray of a man watching his empire crack down the center in real time. That's not... He reached for the contract. His hands were shaking. Let me see that. Tessa handed it to him, gently, the way a doctor hands a patient their results when both of them already know what the paper says. Grant stared at the page. The German words blurred. He couldn't read them. He had never been able to read them. He had trusted his translator to catch anything dangerous, and his translator was in a hospital bed on the Garden State Parkway with a bruised spine and a dead phone. Who are you? Clara Werner's voice was quiet, but carried across the room like a wire pulled taut. She wasn't asking Grant. She was looking directly at Tessa. Tessa said nothing. She straightened her apron, folded her hands, the same hands that had scrubbed Grant's floors for 8 months. But Eleanor Price, standing in the doorway with a manila envelope pressed against her chest, had an answer. Eleanor Price had been carrying the envelope for 3 weeks. She hadn't planned on opening it tonight. She had planned on giving it to Grant privately, on a Monday morning, with coffee and a closed door. But Monday mornings with Grant Whitmore were for numbers and spreadsheets, not for truths that could crack a man's worldview in half. So she waited. And then the dare happened, and waiting stopped being an option. Eleanor stepped into the dining room. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. Her heels clicked once, twice, 3 times on the hardwood floor, measured, deliberate, like a countdown. Every head turned. She walked past the guests, past the candles, past the half-eaten desserts and the untouched wine glasses, and stopped beside Tessa. Not behind her, not across from her. Beside her. The positioning was deliberate, and everyone in the room understood what it meant. "May I?" she said softly. Tessa looked at her. Something passed between them. Not a conversation, but an understanding. The kind that forms between 2 women who have been watching the same man destroy things for years. Tessa gave a small nod. Eleanor opened the envelope. 3 weeks ago, she began, her voice steady and directed at the room, not at Grant. I started looking into the background of our household staff. Standard due diligence. Something Mr. Whitmore should have done when he hired them, but didn't, because he doesn't consider the people who work in his home worth knowing. Grant opened his mouth. Eleanor raised one finger. He closed it. Tessa Collins. Eleanor pulled out a single sheet of paper. Born Tessa Collins Hargrove. Bachelor's degree in linguistics from Georgetown University. Master's degree in international law and diplomacy from Colombia. The room stirred. A chair creaked. Someone inhaled sharply. From 2014 to 2021, she served as a senior interpreter for the United Nations Security Council. 7 years. She interpreted for heads of state, foreign ministers, and ambassadors from over 40 countries. Her language certifications include English, French, Japanese, German, Spanish, Arabic, and Mandarin Chinese. Eleanor paused, not for effect, because her throat was tightening. 7 languages, fluent in all of them, certified at the highest professional level in 5. Henri Dubois leaned back in his chair. He pressed his fingers to his lips and closed his eyes for a moment, the way a man does when he realizes he has been standing next to greatness without knowing it. Mr. Tanaka remained standing. His expression hadn't changed, but his posture had. Straighter, more formal. The posture of a man in the presence of someone he now considered an equal. Clara Werner removed her glasses again. She wasn't looking at Eleanor. She was looking at Tessa's hands, the hands that had carried trays and scrubbed floors for 8 months, hands that had once held diplomatic briefings at the highest level of international governance. In 2021, Eleanor continued, and her voice dropped lower, Tessa's husband, Nathan Hargrove, was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Treatment lasted 14 months. He passed away in March of 2022. The room went still. A different kind of still. Not shock. Grief. The medical bills totaled over $200,000. Insurance covered a fraction. Tessa sold their home in Georgetown. She sold their car. She closed her practice. She paid what she could and took on debt for the rest. Eleanor folded the paper, looked at Grant. She applied for a position as a housekeeper in your home because it was the only job that offered room and board, which meant every dollar of her salary could go toward the debt. She didn't tell anyone who she was. She didn't ask for special treatment. She showed up every day, cleaned your house, served your guests, and endured your— Eleanor searched for the word— your entertainment, because she had no other choice.
The room was no longer looking at Tessa with curiosity. They were looking at her with something far more dangerous for Grant Whitmore. Respect. Tessa stood in the same spot she had been standing all evening. Her hands were still folded in front of her apron. Her back was straight. Her face was dry. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Everyone else in the room was doing it for her.
I needed a job, Tessa said quietly. The first full sentence she had spoken to the room all night that wasn't a translation. This was a job. That's all. 5 words at the end. Simple. Ordinary. And they hit harder than everything that came before them. Grant Whitmore stared at the woman he had called furniture. The woman he had made apologize to 12 strangers. The woman he had dared to read a contract because he thought she couldn't. He opened his mouth to speak. Nothing came out. The first person to speak was Henri Dubois. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room was so quiet that a whisper would have carried to the back wall and bounced. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, looked at Grant the way a man looks at a stain on an expensive shirt, with distaste and the quiet certainty that it can never be cleaned. Mr. Whitmore. His accent made the name sound like a verdict. Your maid, a woman you invited to this table as a joke, just saved you $85 million. She identified a clause that your legal team missed, your hired translator missed, and you made her apologize for spilling water. He let that sit. I have done business in 31 countries. I have sat across from presidents and prime ministers, and I have never, not once, seen a man treat someone who just saved his fortune with less dignity than he would show a stray dog. Grant's lips moved. Henri, I didn't know. That
is precisely the problem. Dubois picked up his briefcase. You didn't know. You didn't ask. You didn't care. And that tells me everything I need to know about how you would manage our investment.
He turned to Tessa, reached into his jacket pocket, produced a business card, cream-colored, embossed, the same quality as the dinner invitations. Madame Collins Hargrove, if you are ever in Paris, the Dubois Group would be honored to have a conversation with you. Tessa took the card. Her hand was steady.
Clara Werner was next. She didn't stand. She didn't need to. She spoke from her chair with the surgical precision of someone who had spent 30 years cutting through lies in boardrooms across Europe. Mr. Whitmore, I came here tonight prepared to commit $40 million to this partnership. I reviewed the English version of the contract. My team reviewed the German version. She paused. We missed clause 14.3b. Your maid did not.
She turned to Tessa. That clause was not an accident. Someone on the drafting team buried it deliberately. You caught it in a live read, under pressure, in your, fourth language tonight? That is not luck. That is mastery. She reached into her bag and pulled out a card of her own. Werner Capital has an opening for head of international relations. The salary is considerably more than what you earn scrubbing this man's floors.
Tessa took the second card. Still no expression, still no tears. Just the quiet, steady composure of a woman who had survived worse than this and knew it. Mr. Tanaka was the last to speak. He had remained standing since the Japanese translation. He looked at Grant for a long time, not with anger, not with contempt, but with something more devastating. Disappointment.
In my country, he said slowly, each word chosen with care, we judge a man not by the size of his business or the height of his building. We judge him by how he treats the people who serve him, the ones who cannot fight back. He gathered his documents, placed them neatly into his briefcase, closed the latches with 2 quiet clicks. I will not be signing tonight. I wish you well, Mr. Whitmore, but I do not wish to be your partner.
One by one, the guests began to leave. Not in a rush, not dramatically. They simply stood, collected their things, and walked out. Some nodded at Tessa as they passed. A woman squeezed her arm. A man in a gray suit paused at the door, turned back, and said, "Thank you." Within 20 minutes, the dining room was empty. The candles were still burning. The plates were still on the table. The wine was still breathing in the decanter. Grant Whitmore sat alone at the head of a table set for 26. He looked at his hands. The hands that had built an empire. The hands that had signed 1,000 contracts. The hands that had pointed at a woman and called her stupid. For the first time in his life, they looked empty. 3 days passed. The estate was quiet in a way it had never been before. Not peaceful. Hollow. Like a theater after the last show. The seats still warm, the lights still on, but the audience gone and not coming back. Grant hadn't left his office. Mrs. Caldwell brought his meals on a tray and took them back, untouched. Douglas cooked anyway. Routine was the only thing holding the house together. Tessa worked her shifts as usual. She made the beds. She polished the silver. She vacuumed the hallways with the same invisible precision she had practiced for 8 months. Nothing in her routine changed. But everything around her had. The other staff looked at her differently now, not with suspicion, with something closer to awe. The disorienting kind that comes when you realize the person beside you was never who you thought they were.
Mrs. Caldwell stopped calling her Housekeeping 3. She called her Tessa.
Just once. Quietly. In the hallway. Tessa nodded and kept walking, but something in her shoulders softened for half a second. On the morning of the third day, Tessa sat on the edge of her bed in the basement room and opened her laptop. 3 emails, 3 different countries, 3 different futures.
The first was from Henri Dubois. The Dubois Group was expanding its legal advisory division in Paris. They needed someone fluent in contract law and at least 4 European languages. The position came with a signing bonus, relocation assistance, and an apartment in the 7th arrondissement. Henri had written the email himself. It ended with, "You reminded me why I got into this business." The second was from Clara Werner. Werner Capital, Berlin, Head of International Relations. Salary, $420,000 a year. Benefits, equity. A corner office on the 14th floor of a glass tower overlooking the Spree River. The email was 3 sentences long, precise and German to its core. The position is yours if you want it. Start date is flexible. Respond at your convenience.
The third was a voicemail. Mr. Tanaka's assistant had called on his behalf. Tanaka Holdings was establishing a new translation and compliance division in Tokyo. They wanted Tessa to lead it. The message was brief and formal, but it ended with a sentence the assistant said Mr. Tanaka had dictated himself. "Colin-san, Tokyo has a place for you. Please consider it." Tessa sat with the laptop open on her knees and Nathan's photograph on the shelf beside her. She looked at his face, the lopsided smile, the kind eyes, the quiet confidence of a man who had always believed she was exactly where she was supposed to be, even when she didn't believe it herself. She chose Werner Capital. Berlin was far enough to start over, close enough to fly back. The salary would clear her debt in 11 months. Nathan would have liked that, the math of it, the clean efficiency. He always said she overthought everything except numbers. She gave her notice that afternoon. Mrs. Caldwell accepted it without a word and shook her hand for the first time in 8 months. On her last morning, Tessa stripped the bed in room 14, folded the sheets, swept the floor, left the room exactly as she had found it, clean, small, and empty. On the metal shelf, she placed the French book she had been reading since her first week. Inside the cover, she had written a note in careful blue ink. "Eleanor, thank you for seeing me. T." She carried her suitcase up the basement stairs, through the kitchen, and out the service entrance. The gravel crunched under her shoes. Flat shoes, the same ones she had arrived in. She didn't look back at the house, but from the second-floor window of his office, Grant Whitmore watched her walk down the driveway and through the iron gates. He stood there long after she disappeared. His coffee went cold in his hand. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He just stood at the glass and watched the only person who had ever told him the truth walk out of his life. 1 year later, Tessa Collins Hargrove stood behind a glass podium at the G20 Economic Summit in Hamburg. 11 heads of state, 200 delegates, 46 cameras. She interpreted the opening remarks from German to French, then from French to Japanese, then from Japanese to English, all in real time, without notes, without hesitation. The earpieces crackled with her voice across 4 languages and 6 continents. No one in that room knew she had spent the previous year scrubbing marble floors in New Jersey. And she didn't tell them. Some stories belonged to the person who lived them. The debt was gone, paid in full. 11 months, just as she had calculated. The final payment cleared on a Tuesday afternoon. She was sitting at her desk in Werner Capital's Berlin office when the confirmation came through. She didn't celebrate. She closed the laptop, walked to the window, and looked out at the Spree River for a long time. That same week, she filed the paperwork for the Nathan Hargrove Memorial Scholarship, a fund for first-generation linguistics students who couldn't afford to finish their degrees.
She seeded it with $30,000 of her own money. The first recipient was a 20-year-old woman from Lagos who spoke 4 languages and had been 3 credits short of graduating when her funding ran out.
Back in New Jersey, the Whitmore estate was quieter these days. Grant had sold 2 of his commercial properties. He stopped hosting Tuesday dinners. He started eating in the kitchen instead of the dining room, which was a small thing, but the staff noticed. He also started learning people's names. Douglas became Douglas. Mrs. Caldwell became Margaret. The gardener became Sam. No one knew who was behind the anonymous donation that arrived at the Nathan Hargrove Scholarship Fund every month. A wire transfer from a domestic account, no name attached, no note included. The amount was always the same. It was always on time. Eleanor Price knew. She handled the wire. She never mentioned it. Some things don't need to be said out loud to mean something. Man, just imagine someone handing you a mop when you used to hold the mic at the UN. Imagine swallowing that every single day. Could you do it? Because she did. And she didn't just survive it. She walked out on top. That's the part that gets me.